Three men in bright vests stormed into Kevin Mitchell's home, claiming to be HOA officials. No warning, no warrant, just a shattered door and fake authority. At the center was Randy Larson, a disgraced former compliance officer with a history of harassment, now running a personal operation built on fear and silence. But what unraveled everything wasn't force, it was a whisper from the dark, Leslie's voice on a 911 call that turned fear into fire. And you won't believe how that quiet moment sparked a movement, and how justice, in the end, kicked the door right back in. It was a quiet Saturday evening in Fairview Heights, the kind of neighborhood where time seemed to move a little slower. Neatly trimmed lawns, mailboxes with little flags, wind chimes tapping gently in the breeze. Kevin Mitchell was out back tending the grill, surrounded by the low hum of sprinklers and the crackle of hot charcoal. His dog Baxter lay sprawled under the patio chair, half asleep. Inside the house, his wife Leslie moved through the kitchen, pouring tea into tall glasses, adding lemon wedges like she always did. A true crime show played on mute in the living room. Not for watching, just for company. Background noise. It was a normal evening, the kind you don't remember until something goes wrong. Kevin had just flipped the stakes when he heard it. A sound sharp and out of place. A heavy thud, not from inside, not footsteps. It came from the front of the house. He paused, spatula still in hand. A second impact followed, louder, more forceful. Baxter perked up, ears rigid. Kevin started walking, fast, toward the side gate. Something was off. Then, just as he reached the corner of the house, he heard the third one. A deep, splintering crack. The front door snapped open, not pushed, not unlocked, broken in. Kevin's stomach dropped. He ran. By the time he reached the front walkway, 3 men were already inside his home. They wore bright yellow vests with reflective strips and bold black lettering on the back, HOA enforcement. One of them turned as Kevin approached, raised a hand like a traffic cop, and said firmly, "Step aside, sir. HOA compliance check. You can remain outside if you'd like." Kevin froze. HOA? What compliance check? There had been no warning, no notice on the mailbox, no email. HOAs sent letters. They didn't break down doors. He tried to step forward, but the same man blocked him with a shoulder. Another one disappeared down the hallway. The third started scanning the living room walls, mumbling something about unauthorized fixtures. Kevin's brain scrambled for footing. Something about this felt off, deeply and immediately. The vests looked real. The voices were confident. But the whole thing, the aggression, the speed, the complete lack of explanation, didn't add up. He stammered, "You can't just come in here. This is my house. Where's your ID? Where's a—" The man cut him off. "Sir, you're interfering with an active violation response. Please remain calm." Violation response? That wasn't a thing, at least not in Fairview Heights. Kevin's eyes darted to the splintered door frame. The lock was gone. The hinges were hanging, and these men were moving through his house like they'd done this before. That's when he realized. This wasn't official, this wasn't normal, and this definitely wasn't safe. The moment Kevin demanded identification, something shifted. The man closest to him didn't argue or hesitate. He simply shoved him aside, not violently, but with enough force to say, "You don't matter here." Kevin stumbled, caught himself, and turned back toward the broken front door. But by then, the 3 men were already inside, moving quickly, like they had a plan. They didn't knock things over or break furniture. They didn't need to. They knew exactly where to go. Drawers slid open with quick hands. Cabinets popped. A hallway closet flung wide with a creak. To someone watching from the outside, it might have looked like an official inspection. Brisk, focused, controlled. But to Leslie Mitchell, standing just a few feet down the hallway, it was something else entirely. She had heard the door give way. She had heard Kevin shouting, the deep voices of strangers, and the urgency in his tone that she had never heard before. Not even during last year's kitchen fire. Without thinking, Leslie turned and moved. Fast. Quiet. She slipped into the bedroom, gently pushed the door nearly shut behind her, and crossed the room in 3 long steps. The closet door opened silently. It wasn't panic. It was instinct. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. Inside the walk-in closet, it was dark and still, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own breathing. Her hands were shaking as she pulled her phone from the back pocket of her jeans. She turned off the screen light, muscle memory, and opened the keypad. Her thumb hovered. Then she pressed the emergency call shortcut. The line clicked. A voice answered almost instantly. 911. What's your emergency? Leslie's voice was barely more than breath. I think we're being robbed. They said they're from the HOA, but they broke the door in. My husband's still out there. I'm in the closet. She didn't even realize she was whispering until she heard how soft of her own voice sounded. Every syllable felt heavy, controlled. She slid to the floor, knees to her chest, the phone still against her cheek. Around her, long coats brushed her arms, the hem of a winter jacket against her legs. The carpet was cold. And then, the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate. Floorboards creaking, muffled commands. The voices moved from room to room. Someone opened the bedroom door. She heard it, just barely. A short pause, then footsteps again, not approaching the closet, not yet. She pressed herself deeper into the corner. The operator on the other end of the line asked her to stay calm, asked if she could confirm the address. She gave it in a whisper. Then they said help was on the way. Units were already nearby. Leslie closed her eyes, focused on her breathing. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. Just like the video she'd seen for stress control. Just like her therapist had told her last year. She didn't cry, not yet. There wasn't time for that. All she could do was listen, and wait. As strangers moved through the place she once considered the safest space in her world. And on the other side of the door, Kevin was still trying to stop something he didn't understand. The police arrived 8 minutes after the call, sirens off, headlights dimmed. The cruiser pulled in just as one of the men in the house was unplugging a speaker from the wall. Another was flipping through papers in a drawer. They moved with the casual rhythm of people who didn't expect to be stopped. When the officers stepped inside, weapons holstered but hands ready, the intruders didn't run. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't resist. In fact, they looked inconvenienced, like the officers had shown up too early, like someone had interrupted a job half done. The tall one, bald with a clipboard tucked under one arm, stepped forward first. His tone wasn't angry. It wasn't panicked. It was bored. We're with the HOA. Authorized inspection, mold complaints, couple of safety violations flagged last week. He said it like it was obvious, like he had nothing to hide. The officers asked for identification. The man handed over a plastic badge, no state seal, no barcode, no expiration date, just a printed name and the words Community Standards Officer. The photo was blurry. The laminate bubbled at the edges. The second officer looked down at it, then up at the man. Where'd you get this? It was issued last year. I can call my supervisor. Yeah, do that. One of the officers stepped outside and radioed dispatch. The other asked Kevin to confirm what had happened. Kevin, still standing near the shattered front door, just pointed. They kicked it in, said they were HOA. No warning, no ID, just walked in like they owned the place. Inside the house, another officer picked up one of the official vests and turned it over. The tag was still attached, an online marketplace brand. No seal, no agency code, no department markings, just reflective tape. It took less than 5 minutes for the whole thing to fall apart. The IDs, printed on a home printer. The names? Not listed with any local HOA office. The clipboard? Empty, just a single page with scribbled notes. There was no mold complaint, no inspection request, no records. They weren't with the HOA. They weren't even with a private contractor. They weren't tied to any authority at all. Kevin stood frozen, watching it unfold. His fear, which had felt like a knot in his throat for the past 10 minutes, slowly dissolved, but not into relief, into confusion, then disbelief, and finally, anger. A quiet, internal kind of fury. Because these weren't criminals in masks. They weren't threatening anyone directly. They wore bright vests, spoke calmly, knew what words to use. And it had almost worked. But what made Kevin's hands shake, what really sunk in, was how ordinary they looked, how convincing, how close they'd come to getting away with it. And that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part hadn't happened yet. His name was Randy Larson. He was the one who kicked the door in, the one who had spoken with the most authority, as if he'd done this dozens of times before, and in a way, he had. Randy wasn't just some impersonator in a vest. He was once real. Up until 6 months ago, Randy had worked as a compliance officer for the Fairview Heights Homeowners Association. His job was to inspect properties, issue warnings, and enforce neighborhood standards. Everything from overgrown lawns to structural violations. But his approach had always drawn complaints. Neighbors described him as aggressive, overly strict, sometimes even hostile. He was known for walking into backyards without notice, threatening fines for things that weren't technically violations, and fabricating reports when he couldn't find anything concrete. Residents pushed back. Several filed formal grievances. One even recorded him pressuring an elderly couple over a missing fence permit, a permit that, it turned out, never existed in the first place. Eventually, the board had no choice. But instead of launching an investigation or issuing a public dismissal, they quietly let him go. No charges, no record, no public statement. They just removed his name from the staff directory and hoped the problem would go away. But Randy didn't go away. Instead, he found 2 people from his past, one of them with a known record for unlawful entry, another with connections to vehicle repossession companies. Both knew how to walk the line between legal and illegal. Both understood how intimidation could look like protocol. If you wore the right vest, spoke the right way, and carried a clipboard. They started small, just neighborhoods where the HOA had too much power and too little oversight. Areas where no one ever questioned a man in uniform, where compliance check sounded official enough to pass. Their method was simple. Use fake badges and printed paperwork. Claim there was a violation complaint. Enter quickly, confidently. If confronted, act calm, reference policy. Leave with whatever could fit in a duffel bag. By the time Kevin and Leslie's house was hit, Randy's crew had already visited 5 other homes. Same approach, same story, same silence afterward. And until now, no one had reported it. Kevin sat in the living room as the officers explained what they'd learned. His hands were still trembling, his breath shallow. 6 houses, one of them said quietly. This was the 6th. He looked at Leslie, still pale but composed, sitting beside him. The image of her whispering from the closet, scared, hiding, came rushing back, and all Kevin could think was, it could have gone so much worse. He clenched his jaw, trying to keep his voice steady, but it cracked anyway when he finally said, they could have hurt her. He wasn't thinking like a homeowner anymore. He was thinking like a husband who had trusted the wrong system to protect his home, and for the first time since the night began, rage replaced fear. Kevin expected outrage, not just from the neighborhood, but from the very people whose job was to protect it. He thought the HOA would issue a statement, warn residents, maybe even offer some kind of support. After all, it wasn't just his house. It was their system that had been used to gain entry, their name that had been faked. Surely that mattered. But what came instead was silence. No email went out to homeowners. No meeting was called. No security advisory posted to the community site. There was no apology, no warning, nothing. When Kevin finally reached someone from the HOA board, after days of unreturned calls, he was met with a voice that sounded more inconvenienced than concerned. Look, we understand what happened, but this wasn't on us. He acted independently. He doesn't work here anymore. We hold no liability. No liability. That phrase echoed louder than the door slamming open had. Kevin tried to push back, to explain how the man had used the HOA's image, their structure, their terminology, but the response didn't change. He wasn't one of ours. Case closed. As far as they were concerned, it wasn't their problem. And that was the moment Kevin understood something deeper. They weren't going to fix anything. They were going to bury it. They weren't protecting the neighborhood. They were protecting themselves. Meanwhile, life inside the Mitchell home had changed, in ways small but relentless. Leslie couldn't sleep through the night. Every creak in the floorboards made her flinch. She started keeping the bedroom lamp on, even when Kevin turned off his side. The soft light cast long shadows on the closet door, the same one she had hidden behind. She stopped watching crime shows, even in the background. It felt too close now, too real. Kevin noticed it all. He didn't say anything, not at first, but he stopped grilling. The backyard that once brought him comfort now felt exposed, unprotected, the place he stood when it all began. He found himself staring at the front door more than usual. Not the door itself, but the space where the deadbolt used to be. The way the new frame still didn't quite sit right. It was fixed, but not the same. He watched Leslie walk a little faster down the hallway now, watched how she checked behind her when she turned off the lights at night. This wasn't about a door anymore. It was about trust. And something had broken that night that no lock could repair. But the silence from the HOA, that indifference, did something unexpected. It didn't scare Kevin. It ignited him. All the fear, the confusion, the shame of being deceived in his own home. It began to transform. That quiet, that nothing. It started to feel like a dare, and Kevin wasn't the kind of man who could live with pretending everything was fine. Kevin wasn't a public speaker. He didn't like drawing attention to himself. But that week, as he sat on the edge of his couch, watching Leslie sleep with the lamp still on, he opened his laptop. He went to the folder labeled Front Cam, August 13th, and clicked play. He watched the moment again, the door splitting open, the shadows rushing in, the vest flashing with the words HOA enforcement, Kevin's own voice rising in shock, then silence. Then something inside him clicked. He uploaded the footage to a private link. No edits, no commentary. Just the raw file. Then he posted it to Facebook with a short caption. These men broke into our home. They claimed to be from the HOA. They weren't. This is what happened. The video wasn't polished. It didn't need to be. Within an hour, people started sharing it. By morning, it had been reposted to several neighborhood groups. By that evening, it was on Reddit under a thread titled Fake HOA Enforcers Break into Family Home. And 2 days later, it aired on local news alongside an interview with Kevin, who sat in front of the same front door, now reinforced with a steel latch. But what happened next surprised him even more. The messages began. Dozens of them, some short. He came to our house too, others longer. Stories of intimidation, manipulation, all under the same pretense of compliance. We were told our garden hose was a violation. When we pushed back, they threatened us with fines. My daughter was home alone when someone knocked and said that they were with the HOA. She didn't open the door, but they stood outside for almost 10 minutes. They said we had unauthorized patio furniture, then they asked to inspect it. Kevin read each one. Some included names, some didn't. But the pattern was undeniable. What he thought had been a random, targeted break-in wasn't random at all. It was systemic, a pattern of fear wrapped in the language of rules and regulations. And worse, it wasn't just about Randy. It was about a culture, because even when the real HOA wasn't involved, the image of authority was enough to silence people. That power, real or faked, had become a weapon. And for years, most residents had chosen to say nothing, out of fear, out of shame, out of not knowing whether it was worth it to fight a structure designed to feel untouchable. Until now. Kevin's video didn't just document a crime, it sparked something, a chain reaction. One voice became 10, then 100, then more. People weren't just watching, they were finally speaking. And Kevin understood this wasn't just his story anymore. At first, Kevin didn't know what to do next. He wasn't a lawyer, he wasn't an activist, but what he did have was proof, and now, momentum. So he started simple, a petition titled Reform the HOA, Stop Abuse of Power and Impersonation. He posted it to the same groups where the video had gone viral. He included links, screenshots, his story, and the stories of others who had written to him. People who had been ignored, dismissed, or pressured. Within 48 hours, it had over 3,000 signatures. By the end of the week, nearly 15,000. Then came the town hall. Kevin showed up with a folder full of evidence, security footage stills, copies of emails residents had forwarded him, and HOA violation notices that looked suspiciously similar to ones Randy had faked in the past. He wasn't loud. He didn't make speeches. He just laid out the facts, clearly, calmly, relentlessly. This wasn't one man acting alone. It was a failure in oversight, a system that allowed silence to matter more than safety. People listened. Some nodded. Others looked down, uncomfortable. But by the end of the night, there was no denying it. This wasn't just a personal incident. It was a community failure. Kevin didn't stop there. He reached out to local journalists, sent them detailed timelines, interview clips, contact info for other victims who agreed to speak. He dug through public HOA records, finding board meeting minutes that showed early complaints about Randy, long before he was let go. Some of the documents had been redacted. Others were never published at all. He posted screenshots, annotated them, explained them like an investigator building a case. People paid attention. He emailed city council members, copied news outlets, uploaded everything to a public Google Drive for transparency. Every move the HOA didn't make, he made for them. Every silence they offered, he filled with truth. Meanwhile, Randy Larson now faced multiple felony charges: impersonating a public official, forced entry without consent, possession of fraudulent credentials. Aggravated burglary with intent to defraud. It was justice, or at least a start. But for Kevin, that wasn't enough. Because for him, and for Leslie, the real fear hadn't come from Randy kicking in the door. It had come from no one stopping him sooner. Kevin wasn't after revenge. He wanted safeguards, transparency, oversight, clear rules, real accountability. And he wasn't alone anymore. People began organizing. Other neighborhoods held their own meetings. Some started filming HOA visits, requesting ID, reading the bylaws aloud on camera. They weren't being rude, they were being informed. Kevin became a voice, not of rebellion, but of reason. A name passed around in threads titled "How to Protect Your Home Legally" and "Know Your HOA Rights." The man who just weeks before was standing in his backyard flipping steaks now stood as a lightning rod for change, all because his wife whispered in a closet. Because in 8 seconds of fear, she made a decision that would ripple through an entire community. And Kevin made sure that whisper was heard, loud enough to shake the silence that followed. 2 months later, the sound of hammers and drills echoed through Fairview Heights. But this time, it wasn't from unannounced inspections. The HOA office door had a new sign, the logo had changed, and the names on the board, all gone. After weeks of mounting pressure, public backlash, and media scrutiny, the entire HOA board was forced to resign. Petitions, emails, community meetings packed with standing room only crowds, they all added up, and something rare happened. Real change. In their place, residents voted in a new independent oversight committee, composed not of real estate insiders or legal consultants, but neighbors. Retired teachers, engineers, small business owners, people who lived on the same streets and walked the same sidewalks. Within their first 2 meetings, they established 3 major reforms. 1. All inspections now require formal city oversight. No private entries, no surprise walkthroughs. 2. HOA representatives must carry registered digital identification, no badges printed at home. 3. Home entry without the homeowner's written consent is fully banned. No exceptions. No gray areas. These weren't just rules. They were a new standard, built on what the old one had failed to provide: trust. As for Randy and his 2 accomplices, the court didn't hesitate. Over 6 documented break-ins, impersonation, and attempted theft under fraudulent authority, the judge handed down a total of 11 years in combined sentencing. No appeal, no probation. It wasn't about revenge. It was about closing the door, the right way this time. A few weeks later, something happened that felt even more symbolic than the court decision. On a warm Friday evening, neighbors on Kevin and Leslie Street organized a small block party. Folding tables, homemade dishes, fairy lights strung between trees. Kids rode bikes again. Music played. Someone brought a karaoke speaker, which mercifully stayed unplugged. Kevin stood behind his grill, same as always, tongs in hand. This time, no fear in his posture, no glance over his shoulder. And for the first time in weeks, Leslie laughed. Not politely, not nervously, really laughed. She wore a sundress and sandals, holding lemonade in one hand and waving at a neighbor with the other. She didn't look over her shoulder when someone approached. She didn't flinch when a car door slammed. They were still healing. That was true, but the fear had loosened its grip. At one point, Kevin looked toward the house, the same house that had once been stormed like a crime scene, the same house where his wife had whispered from the dark, and for the first time in what felt like forever, it felt like home again. In the end, it wasn't the video. It wasn't the headlines. It wasn't the petition, the council hearing, or even the courtroom verdict. Yes, all of those things mattered, but none of them could have happened if not for one moment. A moment that no one saw. No cameras, no microphones. Just a voice, barely louder than breath. That night, as chaos moved through their home, as strangers wore the mask of authority and fear clung to every wall, Leslie Mitchell hid in the dark. Between winter coats and storage bins, she held her phone with shaking fingers. And then, in the stillness, she spoke. "They're in the house. Please come. Please hurry." No panic, no screaming, just a whisper. A whisper that cut through fear, a whisper that reached help in time, a whisper that saved her life, and Kevin's. But more than that, it ignited something bigger. That whisper became a signal. It exposed the cracks in a system built on silence. It showed others, people who had been brushed aside, ignored, minimized, that their voices still had power. It didn't shout. It didn't rage. But it was louder than any siren that followed, because sometimes justice doesn't knock politely. It doesn't come with banners or fanfare. Sometimes it begins in the quiet. Sometimes it starts with a single voice, barely audible, but undeniable. A voice that refuses to be ignored. A voice that says, "This is not okay." A voice that, no matter how small, starts a storm. And in this story, it wasn't Kevin's courage. It wasn't the community's uprising. It wasn't the law or the reform or the fire that followed. It was her, a whisper in the dark, from a closet, in a house that once felt safe, and would be again, because sometimes justice doesn't knock. Sometimes it kicks the door back in.